welcome to the Mindset Michelle TV show. We're so super excited for you to be joining us for yet another incredible episode today. And we have the fabulous Michael Bartura joining us on the show today. Hello, Michael.
Hello. Nice to meet you all.
It's so wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And for those of you that may not be as aware of Michael and his background, Michael is the associate at the Asian Leadership Foundation. He's a facilitator at the Leadership Coaching in 3C program, and he's a specialist in the wellness, mindfulness, and learning and development space. But I'm fascinated, Michael, Asian leadership. I haven't heard of it before, but also your journey into this wellness and mindfulness space. I'm sure everybody listening will be fascinated. So please tell us a little bit more about how you came to be working in this space and why you're so passionate about it.
Thanks. Yeah, I hope I can, sort of provide a very brief excursions to the last 40 years of walkabouts that I did. But essentially, it came out of me realizing as I was moving from Israel, I grew up in Israel, and then as I was moving from Israel to Australia, I realized something very interesting in the nature of my being, and that is that before I left Israel, I assumed that my identity, who I was as a young Israeli man, was who I was in principle, right? And then suddenly, having come to another culture, another place, another reality, it became apparent to me that what I know about myself is very much a narrative. I've adopted a narrative of where I grew up, but then that narrative didn't actually fit very well with this new place that I was discovering when I came to Australia. And so it started to occur to me that there is a good inquiry in trying to understand, well, what is it in the being of human being that is not subjective to the experience of the narrative in which you grow up with, or the narrative in which you live your life? And it's that kind of curiosity and inquiry that led me to the work that I'm doing now, essentially trying to understand what is it in my mechanism of thinking and interacting and being and relating with other people that creates the identity of Michael, and what is it that is prior to that? What happened, for example, if somehow, heaven forbid, I would have lost my memory and someone whisked me to an island in the Pacific, for example, and I wake up tomorrow morning and I have no idea of who I am. And yet there will be a being there that will get up and will be hungry and will want to connect with people and will want to sort of interact with its environment and his environment and whatnot. So that inquiry is at the core of what the work that I've been sort of doing for a long time. The Asian Leadership Institute was founded by my mentor and friend, Brian Barley, who has a background in monastic sort of tradition, both the Tibetan and the Buddhist tradition, the Thai traditions. And so essentially he set up to provide coaching from a mindfulness-based approach. It's probably the oldest coaching institute in Asia. And I have connected with him more than 20 years ago, and so developed my relationship, my connection to the institution, and became an associate and a provider or a facilitator within that. Essentially, what I do is I look at trying to find spaciousness around where executives are on the trot, on the treadmill, in the rat race, and like everything that we have to do in order to be successful is so busy and so demanding that we often don't have a point to kind of stop and think, okay, well, am I being resourceful in the way that I'm interacting as an executive? Am I being resourceful and fruitful in the way that I'm learning about what works for me, what works for others, and how do I meet those sort of two facets? How do I bring them together, right? So a lot of it is about developing self-awareness, developing emotional intelligence. And the core of my work is a body of work that was developed by Rick Hanson called positive neuroplasticity, which essentially trying to train your brain to reverse or at least soften the edges of the negative bias that we all have as humans, which looks at what's going to go wrong, what's the worst that can happen, because in the past that serves us really well to survive tigers and other predators. But it doesn't really work well when you have deadlines and, sort of demanding workspaces and 50 hours a week, kind of threadmill sort of movement on your to-do list. So that's the kind of work that I do.
Wow, and what a wonderful, wonderful explanation. I mean, from Michael in Israel, and I could really feel that, you know, that narrative and that identity of self that you had back in Israel. This is who I am, and this is who Michael is, through to being in Australia, and then awakening to that curiosity about, well, if I'm not all of those constructs that I kind of created in Israel around who Michael is, because now it kind of doesn't fit and it's being seen in a different light here in Australia.
Yeah.
What does that all then mean? And what a wonderful way to then develop this mindfulness and wellness and work with the Asian Leadership Institute. I'm interested then, being somebody that's done so much self-reflection and self-awareness work, what is it that's, you know, success means to you as an individual now? What would you say success is?
Yeah, beautiful question. You know, I think unfortunately for us, we are struggling with two elements in our core personality, our core being, where we get lost with this idea of success. The first is that, as I've mentioned briefly before, we live as modern being in this 21st world century, and we're very lucky here in Australia to kind of live at the level of the cream of it, right? There's plenty of people on the planet who live in 21st century yet struggling with very kind of old realities of survival. But for us, we live, you know, a very comfortable, essentially, life, even when we're not necessarily successful by the standards of our Western or developed society. We're still relatively comfortable, right? So we have this. The first element is the dichotomy between the brain that was evolved to, you know, survive tigers and still very much wired to do that, but not wired to deal with the reality of modern life, right? And that, in a sense, brings a lot of anxiety for us in terms of, okay, how can I stay in control of my environment? Because in the past, staying in control with my environment was very much, you know, knowing how to hunt, knowing how to gather, knowing how to, you know, be part of the tribe. And that was about it. You know, like there wasn't a lot more that's going on, and one generation sort of passed that wisdom to the next and so on. So that's the first element. And the second element, which is very much interconnected to it, is that this idea of a tribe, of a group of people that I intimately know, that I've known since I was a kid, that I know my role in it, I know my place in it, and they're all familiar to me. That's gone for us, right? At best, we might have a nuclear family with a bit of lucky, you know, sort of family. That family will be well connected and, you know, celebrating stuff together. But on the whole, there is a lot of dysfunctional kind of social connections that the brain, again, is not wired to handle. So these two holes in our heart, I would call, right, the tribe-shaped hole and the wilderness-shaped hole in our heart, suggests to us that we need to seek something on the outside to feel.
So I'll just sorry to interrupt there, but
sure,
we're interested in what does success then? Because
I'm getting to it. I'm getting to it. Sorry, I'm getting to it. What I'm trying to say is that we tend to project success on the things that people have. That society have instructed us as, if you get that and this and the other, if you get the car, if you get the job, if you get the right kind of, you know, the pretty partner or whatever it is, then you'll be successful. You'll have enough money in the bank, that you'll be successful. You'll have, you know, sort of good social connection. That sort of starts to bring it towards the direction of what success is. But essentially, success is feeling whole inside. Success is feeling settled and calm, and the ability for me to be able to deal with whatever it is that life is sending my way without being too ruffled and without being too unplugged from, you know, what I feel my reality is. Like, if my success is my money, then if I lose my money, I'm suddenly not successful. If my success is, you know, my achievement or my status, right? When I lose my status, suddenly I'm not successful. And so if your success depends on an external kind of feature in your life, then you're dependent on that feature to be successful. And what we're looking for, essentially, both as individuals, but you know, more and more as a society, is what kind of success is evident in the way that I feel when I get up in the morning, in the way that I feel when I go to bed. And I would say in that context, success is your ability to know yourself and then to know how to roll with the punches, be grateful for the good stuff and graceful with the stuff that is difficult. And yeah, it took me a while to get there. I appreciate your patience, but I needed to kind of outline those sort of premises.
I can appreciate that. It's just as there's a number of guests that come on the show, a number of them can go off into more of the societal, what does success means,
Right.
And so to keep it a bit more direct and relevant, that's why I
Sure.
can get a little bit more direct.
Yeah, I get that.
Well, what does that then mean to you? And I love how you brought it together and explained it so beautifully about the two holes in the heart, the wilderness hole and the tribal hole. And so for you, success that equals the ability to know yourself. And I'm guessing then, or kind of leading then into success equals knowing how to fill those two holes in your heart. Yeah. So knowing how to fill the wilderness hole and the tribal hole. Yeah. If I follow that thread along.
Yeah, and practicing the little steps that will allow you to appreciate a connection with a relative, a connection with a child, a connection with a friend, and appreciate a moment in nature, a moment where you drink a glass of water, a moment where you suddenly feel like, oh, you know what, I'm healthy today, I'm fine today. Like we tend to forget to appreciate all the standard stuff, and we only kind of wake up to it when it's gone, you know, like we take our health for granted until it's kind of start to deteriorate, that sort of stuff. So learning how to soften the edges of this mad rush towards, oh, I've got to have that in order to feel good. I desire and I need to fulfill my desire in order for me to feel settled, when the reality of it is feeling settled is where we are as a baseline. And it's because we took ourselves outside, projected ourselves onto getting this and getting that and getting this and getting that we're not feeling settled, right? Like if we just come back to ourselves, then we're successful in being who we are, which is essentially a content being. You look at babies, if they're fed, right, and if they warm and they cuddle, they don't need a lot. They're quite content and happy in that way.
Fabulous. And so to take this like in a more directional kind of way as well, many of the people watching are working in their own business or working in the workforce. And so I'm sure they're interested taking these concepts of filling those holes in your heart, filling the wilderness and the tribal hole. What would be some key tools or tips or suggestions that you have for how they can identify what those holes mean to them, and tips around creating that mindset for success by focusing on filling those holes?
Yeah. Okay. I want to share two ideas that will be helpful as a framework, and then maybe a couple of practices, right? So the first idea is that if we start to tune into the way that our emotional apparatus works, what you'll notice is that we get triggered by situation outside. So in other words, emotions or feelings sort of come up in a moment and we feel in a particular way. And that is the way of the system, the body-mind organism, to kind of deal with its environment and its reality, its experience, right? The problem for us is not so much that first edge of the emotional kind of experience, but what we do with it. We often take an emotion and then we start to kind of resent it, or we start to wanting to run away from it, or we wanting to change it, or we wanting to sort of give it to someone else, right? So if we get angry and then suddenly we say to ourselves, oh, I shouldn't get angry, or we start to ruminate on the reasons why we're angry, and instead of just letting the experience of anger come and go, we get stuck with it in our head, right? So that understanding of how we are unsettled and therefore triggered easily into trying to control our environment, being emotionally unsettled, is a really useful one to reflect on, right? It's like What am I really needing when I get angry? What am I really needing when I get tense? What am I really needing when I get reactive? And often you'll find that if you allow yourself to just experience the emotion and be present with it, it will pass quite fast. The research suggests that it takes about 90 seconds for the cascade of, neurochemicals, everything that gets sort of triggered by the emotional apparatus to pass, right? And feeling the heart, the holes in the heart in such a sense is about becoming present, allowing for that emotional wave to come through you, and then moving beyond it into, okay, well, what will be a resourceful response rather than stewing in my emotions? So that's the first piece. And the second piece is understand that every time I interact with someone else, I interact from within a certain script of how I believe them to be. We can't actually understand another being. We have an image of what that other being is, and we're interacting with that image. And to us, that seems like that image is really solid, in the same way that I thought that my Israeli identity was really solid. To us, it seems that the other person is really solid. I'm interacting with that person because they're this way or that way, and some of their ways is happy to me and other ways are not. But it is our projection onto that person, right? Like, we can't actually interact with that person. We can only interact with the way that we feel about it. So in that spaciousness between the emotions as they happen and what we do with them, and between the projections that we have on other people and between who they are indeed, we have a lot of capacity to start making choices by stopping for a second between the trigger and the response. Ask ourselves, what would be the most resourceful kind of response? So let's make it real in terms of the activities, right? Like, you get up in the morning and you get into your car and you're driving to work and someone cuts you, right? And the natural reaction is to, because often we're stressed already, is to kind of get really annoyed with them, right? But notice that getting annoyed with them doesn't do anything other than making you feeling shit about the whole situation, right? And if we can teach ourselves to watch what's going on without jumping straight into broiling in their reactions that's coming up. It's like, oh, someone has cut me and I'm feeling a bit edge. And then, okay, so what? Like, just bring yourself a little bit back from the experience of the moment to moment when you're reactive, and learn to watch that reaction. That spaciousness will allow you to start becoming a bit more calm, a bit more choosy in terms of how you respond.
Wow, again, I'm watching my own emotions about trying to control this situation, which is really quite interesting, because I love it as we're doing these shows and people are talking about concepts, and I'm going, well, how am I trying to control this process, and what kind of preconceived ideas going to the concepts that you're talking about may have had about this interview, etc. So I love taking it back to when driving a car and somebody pulls in front of you, and it's about stopping and watching your emotions and watching that in that spaciousness, how you choose to then react or not react to the situations that you find your life in. And as with many times on the show, I find that I'm in that situation now with the, how much do I control, moving on to more tips and suggestions, and how much do I allow these beautiful and in-depth answers that you're giving to come with more explanation than we would normally have due to the time limits around the show. Right. But I think what you're talking about is actually really valid and wonderful stuff. So I love the steps you're giving about tuning into your emotions, and then recognizing the 90 seconds, that you can let an emotion flow through you. So the emotion may come up, but you don't have to react to it. You can look for that space between emotion and reaction, and choose how you're going to then react. Similarly, with understanding people and, the image you have of a person, and then how you react to that, having that choice point, again, I think is really valuable with the increase in digital and the increase in globalization from many things to do with digital. It means that any and every situation, driving a car, being in the TV show, whatever it might be, we have these opportunities in every moment of our lives to treat ourselves like a bit of a scientific experiment.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and if I may allow, just to give you a couple of science-based data points to kind of elucidate how crucial it is for us to do this work. So on average, humans think, depends on which source you go to, but 20, 30, 40, 50, some people say up to 80,000 thoughts a day, right? Because a thought comes and then another thought and then another thought. If you watch your own mind, it's just a blurbs of thoughts, just going on and on and on. From the morning you wake up until you go to sleep, thought after thought after thought. And most of them, about 80% on average, are negative in nature because of that negative bias I mentioned before. Because there's no benefit for nature for you to be happy. There's benefit for nature for you to be able to live long enough to pass on your genes to the next generation, right? So where is the tiger? What's going to go wrong? Who hates me? Who's angry? Who should I, be careful of? Who should I attack? Who should I be, sort of annoyed with? That's a lot more, that pertains a lot more to the original design of us trying to survive on the savannah, right? And so if you think about it, if 80% of thousands and thousands and thousands of thoughts in your day are negative in nature, what kind of sort of soup are you, sort of swimming in your own stew kind of thing of like what's going on and how bad it is and how, like you want to change it. Why would we want it? Why would we want to live, right, a daily life in which we mostly stew in our own negativity, right? And so unfortunately, we kind of take it for granted because we used to ourselves as being that who we are. And, I think it was Walt Whitman who says, or maybe it was Thoreau, but anyway, someone said, most people live life of quiet desperations. Like how many happy people do we know, right? So we can change that. That's the point I'm trying to make. Like if we start to look for that spaciousness between how things are coming up in our heads and what we do with them, we can train our brain to over time just soften the edges of that negativity, and with certain practices, mindfulness practices, literally rewire our brain to be happier. And that's a really worthwhile kind of edge of success that I would vouch for, right? So.
And I've spoken before about some of the words of wisdom from parents, about if you get angry, counting to 10 before you opening your mouth. Yes. And before you respond. Yeah. So it's funny how many of these old wives or family kind of funny quirks actually have a lot of their basis in things that people have known in some way inherently, knowing that out of the day, if there's 80,000 thoughts, then nearly 80% of them are going to be negative. So people are walking around with this hard wiring about you can't do this, you're not good enough, you're this, you're that. And so it does take training. I think that's one of the keys that I'm hearing from you today. It actually takes training to recognize you're doing that on autopilot because of your inherent natural fight or flight to survive and be here on the planet.
Yeah.
So if that's your starting premise for a day, then recognize, well, I'm starting here. So it needs a conscious choice to look for those spacious moments between the stimulus and the response.
Yes.
And in that conscious moment, to actually choose how you want to respond to the emotions, to the thoughts, to the situation, to the guy pulling in front of you and driving, whatever it might be. But one of the things I love about that as well is around, we do a lot of work around the empowering people. And in this framework, what we would be talking about is it's empowering you around your thoughts and your feelings. You're not kind of a slave to them or subject to them without any ability to change them or reprogram them.
Yeah.
And I think for many people, it can be hard to recognize if they feel something, they feel it. Yes, if they feel it, but then you can reprogram how you respond to it. So it might not change the feeling, but you can change the response. And I love the other very quick example I love using there is when you watch little children and they fall over and they look up and they look around and they're looking to see if anybody is watching. because they will determine their response. If somebody's watching, they can burst out crying because somebody's watching, I've fallen over, so I want some attention. But if nobody's watching, then they can decide, oh, nobody's watching, so I can get up and keep playing.
Yes, indeed.
Because nobody's watching, so I don't need to react to get attention. But I think as humans, you know, these examples fit very, as adults and in the workplace and in life, these examples can be just as true about, you know, I'm having a bad day, but there's nobody around to bitch about it too. So I'm just going to get on with my day.
And those internal pathways of how we respond to difficulties in life are forged at a very young age, right? So if the child, every time the child tripped, the parents were like really mollycoddling her, or you know, really sort of you know, being too protective, of course the child is learning that, oh, okay, this happens and then I get that kind of energy, and now this becomes a pattern in my life, right? And essentially we are creatures of habits that we developed at a very young age, and most of us still operating on those habits. And that's okay, that's how the brain works. But we need to start asking ourselves, this is where becoming conscious is really important. Like, is this habit serves me well? Because most of our habits don't, right? And most of us do not know how to actually be happy day to day, because we haven't learned to be happy. We've learned to kind of interact with our environment in the way that gets us the most attention, but it's not necessarily through good deeds or good experiences. Quite often it's through attention to the negative experience that we have. So yeah, it's a very, you know, human psychology is quite confused. And William James, who, you know, sort of set up psychology basically in the US in the early years of last century, said something very smart. He says, for the moment, what you pay attention to is your reality. The thoughts that we pay attention to becomes our reality. What we look at, what we focused on, what the meaning that we give those thoughts, that becomes our story. And we tell ourselves the story of our experience, not our experience itself. And that's where we got the power to change. We can tell ourselves a different story. So again, a practical example, I come in the morning to work, I meet Michele, I say, Michele, hi, how are you? And Michele goes, "Rrr." Right. And at that point, my tendency as a human brain often is to take that personally, thinking that, oh, because I say to you something in the meeting yesterday, or because blah, blah, blah. And now I start to tell a story about it, and that becomes my reality. Well, the truth is you might have had a bad morning, and instead of sort of taking it on and kind of like, you know, my tendency would be to react badly, would say, whoa, you're having a bad morning. Can I offer you a cup of coffee? How can I support you? So that sort of fork in the road between taking things personally because something is going on, and between seeing that the world is just happening around you. Things are, you know, some things are better, some things are worse, things are going to go up, things are going to go down. That's just the nature of the flow, right? That's cyclical, right? And I don't actually have to take that on. I can stop and I can say, okay, what would be the loveliest kind of way that I can show up in my response? And usually it's kindness and gratefulness and gratitude, you know, that sort of stuff. So that's where I think the practice is daily, momentarily, moment to moment. The practice calls us to just look at what's going on and say, whoa, okay, the world is a fire. Look at it in curiosity and then say, how can I respond in the most expanded way?
And I love that, you know, the changing of the story and changing of how you react. And you gave some great examples there of you covered and your colleague is angry in the morning, and you can take it personally. Oh, they're angry at me. Or you can go, oh, gee, you're having a bad morning. Can I get you a cup of coffee? Another fabulous example from you about how you can choose in those moments how you're going to react to an external stimulus. You can also go, oh, yeah, they're still angry with me from yesterday, but I'm not going to respond to that. I'm going to just be loving and kind, like you were suggesting as well. It's really, really great pearls of wisdom. Michael, if people are wanting to get hold of you, what's the best way to reach out and connect with you?
Probably LinkedIn is a good one. If you just look for Michael Bartura, Bartura, on LinkedIn, or my handle on LinkedIn is mindfulness coaching. If you look at on Instagram, it's my handle is positive neuroplasticity, one word. It's a bit of a mouthful, but you'll be able to find me. And my website is happyhabits.com.au. So please reach out by all means. I feel very grateful to the universe that I get to do this kind of interactions with people, helping them to find their happy moments, their happy habits. And if you have any questions or any ideas you want to throw at me, please don't hesitate to reach out. Yeah.
Fabulous. And very quickly then, if you were to give some advice to your younger self, what might that advice be?
Take yourself less seriously. Don't, like, it's okay. The drama in your head is just a pattern of thinking. Don't need to buy into the, the sort of the ongoing voice. The human brain is fascinating, but one of the outcomes of it being the most complex object that we know in the universe is that it tends to sound like a talk show host that has 8 different hosts and they don't all like each other, right? So,
all of those different thoughts.
All of those different, yeah. So just don't take them so seriously, right? they're just background noise.
Oh, fabulous. So thank you so much for coming on the show today, Michael. It's been amazing, and thank you for so generously sharing again of your incredible expertise.
With pleasure, and I appreciate your and the listeners' patience in building those conceptual framework, because sometimes you just need some sort of structure to be able to provide some tips. But but fantastic to connect, and looking forward to continue our conversations, our connection, and following you on LinkedIn.
Fabulous. Thank you again. And to everybody out there, thank you for following the show again. We love seeing your feedback and hearing all of your comments, and appreciation for guests like Michael here today. But for now, from my heart to your heart, be great, be fabulous, and be you.